So what is EPL? It's been on the market for about since the early mid 90s. It became they really isolated it as the coverage that was needed, and then they basically excluded off all other policies. So it became its own policy for what it covers, which is really it's for claims. It's a liability coverage that's for claims, and it's a professional liability coverage. And so it's a claims-made policy, and it's related to the employment in the workplace, such as allegations from employees of sexual harassment, wrongful termination, discrimination, wage and hour violations, and retaliation. So they can be made by past, present, and potential employees, including leased, part-time, seasonal, temporary workers, and independent contractors, volunteers, or interns. So there's a broad. Most of the policies will have a broad definition, and so that becomes a great protection for the employer. Okay? And now we're going to talk about the exposures. Basically, there's federal laws such as FLSA and the FMLA and the Title, 7 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and they were created as protected classes. And again, protects against discrimination because of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, pregnancy, hiring, and firing, compensation, and any term or condition of employment. Obviously, there's federal laws, but then state laws could create an exposure. And then what we found based on some of the state laws, some states are more litigious than others. Obviously, I'm from California. I know we're based in California. We know California is the most litigious state, and obviously EPL becomes like a mandatory coverage that really needs to be any employer should have if they have employees. So that becomes an important caveat. However, and then the exposure reduces down when you get outside of California. Some states are more litigious than others, but however, one thing I want to point out is that due to the economy over the last number of years being hard for people, many people have moved definitely out of California. California has been polluted by companies and people for quite a while now, and they're moving to other states. So that means that it's sort of spreading out, that mentality throughout other states. So it's something to really be aware of. Your state if you're in a different state than California, your state may become more exposed, and it becomes really much more important that you offer that coverage to your businesses that you work with. What are some of the other exposures that I haven't talked about? Wrongful termination, sexual harassment, workplace harassment, and retaliation. Those are actually very significant causes of action that are pretty typical in lawsuits. Let's talk about third-party exposures. So the exposures that I was talking about is standard EPL coverage is really for employer-employee disputes. What are we talking about when we talk about third-party? Well, what we're talking about is claims made by non-employed customers, vendors, clients, and they're made against the insured company, and it arises out of the acts by employees. So, and generally, it's either some kind of discrimination or harassment form. So let me give you an example that will make this a little bit easier for you. I'm going to give you an example of an office, and we've got a receptionist that works at the front door, and we have a delivery man. And so let's just say, for instance, the delivery man comes in, and he is harassing the receptionist, sexually harassing her, really coming on strong, and it continues to do it every time that he sees her. She makes a complaint to her employer. Well, that technically is actually a straightforward employment practices liability claim, and that because it is a third party harassing the employee, and the employee has to be protected by the employer's insurance policy for EPL. So let me give you an example of third-party EPL that it makes sense. So now we have the same scenario. We have the receptionist and we have the delivery man. And the delivery guy or person, I'm going to say, we're not going to talk, whether it's man or woman. We're just going to say person. And so that person comes in, and the receptionist person harasses the delivery person and continues to do it over and over and over again. And that delivery person goes to their employer and or files a claim against this company. And third-party coverage is designed to cover that third party. It's a non-employee who alleges that they're being harassed by an employee of that company. So does that make sense? So if you have any questions, put them in the chat room. It's really important. We want to hear your voice. I want to answer any questions as we go along, so please feel free to ask me a question about this if it's not clear. Again, it's the non-employee that's being harassed by the insured company, and generally speaking, that's an employee. Why is EPL so important? Some of it should be obvious. Definitely in California and potentially in a lot of other states too, that the EPL claim, a claim by an employee, is likely to be more litigious or happen more often than a general liability property loss. And that really is a growing exposure. And one thing, so I don't forget, I wanted to make sure that I mention this. Workers' comp is for worker injury, and you may be in a state that is monopolistic, so it's not, you may not even have that exposure. But workers' comp in states that require workers' comp for employers that have employees is for physical injury coverage, right? EPL is for the emotions of the employee, not the injury or physical loss. It's for the emotions and feelings of the employee. So sometimes it's easy to break that down when you're talking to a broker and break it down that way. So I just wanted to mention that. So again, that right there tells you a little bit more why it's important. Again, general liability policies do not cover EPL or can be endorsed with watered down limits. So there really aren't, it's very low level. If you have an EPL claim, those little endorsements are not, added coverages on a general liability policy are not going to help you very much. In California, we have the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Every state has their own. It may be called by something different, but those investigations they're the department that is designed to cover employment disputes by the state. And those investigations take like 229 days with defense costs. It's not a high defense cost, but defense costs running average of $15,000. And what if you lose, then they issue a right to sue letter, typically, and then you move on to an EPL lawsuit, and those can range from the defense anywhere from $25,000 to $150,000, not including the settlement amount. Talking further about this, let's talk about some claims trends. How is the employer going to be impacted if they don't have EPL and they're going to have they have a claim? Well, 40% of the EPL claims, they're brought from private employers, that have under 100 employees. So it really doesn't matter the size of the company, large or small. I mean, you could have one employee, and I'm just going to say this, that many of these claims are generally, the source of the claim is usually potentially because, there's either poor management or a bad hire. So it's somewhere between those two that you will find. So always at you could always have good practices within your company for hiring practices, and then overseeing the management of supervisors and things like that. That can help in these situations. But on the backside, is you can't do much once you've had a claim, and that becomes a problem, because especially if you don't have EPL, because it doesn't really matter the size of the company. 67% of the discrimination cases settled by a jury verdict, they are in the plaintiff's favor. However, most, and those jury awards can be easy, $250,000 plus. 90% of all cases had punitive damages assessed, depending on whether your state allows punitive damages. California does not. But the interesting thing is that most of the claims settle before they go to trial, and that's because of the cost of going to trial is so strong, and your chances of potentially losing are so great that that they settle the cases, and so either way, it's going to impact an employer in that case. So I'm going to have Lexi talk for employment practices liability a little bit about the underwriting considerations, because she's our professional liability underwriter. Lexi.
Okay, thank you, Anae, and thank you so much for all of you for joining. So here are some underwriting considerations when quoting EPL for an applicant. This is what the carrier is looking at in order to determine how to price it and also what coverages to provide. So first and foremost, the type of business. Generally, the higher the salaries at the business, the more severe the claim is going to be. So if we compare, for example, a retail store versus a law firm, they're going to be rated differently because typically that law firm exposure, it tends to be greater. Of course, location can determine pricing. As it was mentioned earlier, some states have broader employee protection than others. And also, I just want to be completely transparent and real with all of our California agents. What does the EPL marketplace look like in California right now? It's a very tough and it's a pricey marketplace. Most carriers are increasing their EPL retentions to $50,000 in California. The lowest retention in California that I have seen right now that you can get on a quote is $25,000. Unless they are grandfathered in with that carrier and they've had their policy with that carrier for years. And then also just want to address, our agents outside of California, retentions still remain very low. You're at that 2,500 to 5,000 at the most. So location and state is always going to be a huge factor for pricing. Of course, management experience, subsidiaries and affiliated firms, number of employees. This has to be broken out by full-time, part-time, seasonal, temporary, and then also your independent contractors. And then some other considerations, salary levels, financial condition, management practices, and then of course, claims history. So all of these are going to determine how their policy is priced, and also, again, what coverages need to be provided.
Great information, Lexi. Outside of California, what do you see like retentions looking like for other states?
They still remain low. I mean, I see them at 2,500. I would say 5,000 at the most. So definitely very different from in the state of California.
Thank you for that information. Okay, so let's talk about another benefit of EPL insurance. Question is EPL insurance alone enough? And we as our company, CID Insurance Programs, we carry an EPL policy, but however, every time we make a hire or we have a question about something, we have the coverage, but we don't necessarily have answers to the questions the legal questions that we have when we're negotiating either hire an employee or we have an issue that comes up with an employee. And so it becomes a question of like, well, we have a corporate lawyer who does EPL work for us, but can do EPL work for us, but do we call that lawyer? Because he's expensive, and I'll tell you, he's not, in California, rates are like $350, dollars an hour. So it's very expensive to try and just to get a question asked. So, and then we won't guess and get it wrong, because we'll definitely risk getting ourselves into hot water. And as the slide says, ignorance is not a defense. So, and we have an HR department. We don't have anyone skilled enough to answer most of those types of questions, which can, really fall into a potentially litigious area. So, you want to keep in mind state federal employment laws are constantly changing as well. And so that keeping abreast of that, you could really use some help with that. And not even all attorneys stay up on that. So they have to go research it, and you pay them to research it. So one of the things that the EPL policy offers, which I think is wonderful, and we take advantage of it with our policy, each policy has a human resource service, and they have a team of legal eagles that answer the employment questions. And so you get just to call them up and ask those questions. So it's a great benefit for your insureds that actually is much more than just the policy, because it's an ongoing saving them money from asking the questions, especially before a hire, to ask those questions. Okay, I'm going to take this last slide, and this is what it's like, the stop and think about it kind of slide. What are you currently doing to sell EPL and cyber? Do you currently include a EPL and cyber quote with every risk, including new business and renewals? And so I think that's a really important question to ask yourself, and organize your office in a way so you can set up systems where these coverages become automatic quotes and they become part of the questions that you do ask. I'm hoping that Jacob, when he sends out the follow-up to all of you who have attended, can send out those questions for the cyber, so that I think that's really important for you to have that. That way you can gather the information before you go online to quote, and that would be helpful. So again, I think it's a cross-sell opportunity at renewal to actually offer those coverages. Also, it's an E&O exposure for you as an agency. So it's really important, because if you're more likely to have a cyber or an EPL claim than any your general liability or property, you definitely need to be offering these coverages on new business and renewals. The second question you want to ask yourself is, are you having success? What percentage of the customers are purchasing it? And that's the harder part, because there's ignorance with your insureds. They don't understand. They think they're covered for everything, with their little package policy. So that becomes the challenge for you as a broker to be able to. And hopefully today we've given you a few tools to be able to do that. But for sure, at least offer the coverages, and then do your best to explain the exposures to them, and reach out to Lexi if you need some ideas or some additional pointers, because she definitely can help you with that. But brokers need to be knowledgeable about these coverages in order to overcome the misperceptions. Here's the problem. Once you have an EPL claim or you have a cyber claim and you don't have the insurance, that's the really big selling point for your client, is because you can't get the coverage once you've had a claim. Carriers don't want, you're on fire. No one wants to touch you. You're too hot, because they just won't write someone who's just had a claim. So that's when everyone comes looking for it. In many cases, that think they didn't need it before. So use that example with your clients as well. So hopefully we've been able to help you a little bit today with cyber and EPL coverages and how to work with your clients to sell this insurance. I want to thank you for joining us today. Make sure you reach out to Lexi, get some quotes, or reach out to get some EPL quotes from her. She's got lots of markets, can do a great job for you. Remember to visit our website, CIDinsurance.com. There's lots of tools on that website for you. So we look forward to doing business with you. Those of you that are new to us, and thank you for your business for those that are returning and work with us all the time. Have a great day.